In radio history and how radio history has affected what I'm doing now. I mean, right now. Because a lot of the time we kind of forget what our forefathers did. Spiritual forefathers, of course, because I'm probably not related to any of these people, but it's still fascinating to read about and to listen to about, I hope. Anyway, this is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more, and we're deviating from form a little bit. Perhaps to prove a point, maybe, but we're deviating from form a little bit to talk about something which I think is extremely important to what we're doing now, to where we are now, and really where culture is today. Things would not be the same way they are now had these particular events not occurred. Pop culture would certainly not be the same, and a lot of our today's culture would just not be the same. It'd be immensely different. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the advent of radio. More specifically, though, I'm talking about the advent of commercial radio. Now, you might argue where commercial radio really took off. There are some people who say that it took place in one place, and there's some people who say that it took place at the location I'm talking about, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Well, we'll focus on the Pittsburgh story. Maybe some other time we'll talk about the other location. But right now we're talking about 8XK. Back in 1916. A guy named Conrad, that was his last name, and he was Frank Conrad was his name, and he was an engineer at Westinghouse, and he was a really smart engineer going by everything that I've read about him, and he was very much interested in radio broadcasts, which he apparently became interested in around 1913. Now, he was born in 1874, May the 4th, 1874. That's a long time ago to me. That's just ages and ages ago. And it's so weird to think about some guy who pioneered the technology that I'm using to talk to you back in the 1916s. That's just bizarre. So he started with a 75-watt station called 8XK back in 1916. He was granted a license for experimental radio. Of course, back then it was only Morse code with a spark buzzer thing, and that was in 1916. Though, think about that. World War I had started in Europe, and the Treaty of Versailles wasn't signed until 1919. So we entered the war in 1917, and that kind of put the kibosh on his broadcasting, because during that time there was a complete blackout of radio communications, and that didn't stop until 1921, or rather I should say later 1920. Now, something that's interesting about that whole thing is Westinghouse, the company he worked for, was a radio contractor. So this radio contractor was very much interested in the development of radio technologies, obviously, and Frank Conrad was one of their lead engineers on radio technology. So obviously he carried that over to the civilian side. Well, he was an engineer at Westinghouse, and he was broadcasting after the war ended from his garage, Frank's garage. He would broadcast his voice, and he would broadcast little records that he had, phonograph records. And then he would go to a record store, and he would get records from them for free, as long as he would acknowledge that he got the records from this particular record store, which might actually be the very first radio commercial. Again, very bizarre to think about. Now, somehow, word got to the vice president of Westinghouse. One thing led to another, and Westinghouse decided to capitalize on this whole new idea of radio, and they sold Westinghouse radio receivers. So Frank Conrad was playing records from his own collection over the air. Now, something to note about that is that would be illegal today. I mean, really illegal today. I couldn't just go home and get in the airplane over the sea on my vinyl and come over here and play it over the air. I couldn't do that. That would be immensely illegal, because I don't have the rights to play that. I haven't paid royalties on it. I don't have any sort of license to play any sort of records from the Elephant Six Recording Company, so I can't really play in the airplane over the sea for you. That would be kind of a crime, actually. I might be forced to pay royalties anyway because of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and I'm sure there's different treaties and such that would govern that. But the point is, I couldn't do what Frank Conrad did back in 1920. That would be a crime for me to do. So what Frank Conrad did was he took risk. Now, it wasn't like a huge risk at the time to broadcast music over the radio because, again, that was not seen as illegal. It was simply seen as the same as playing a radio or playing a record for your friends in your parlor back in the day. That was all it was seen as. But now you'd be broadcasting this song over radio to an immense audience, we would assume. And yeah, and actually Frank Conrad, from what I've read, invented the whole term of broadcasting. It used to refer to agriculture, where broadcasting would be spreading seeds out over a wide area. Broadcasting, you'd literally be throwing it. And then he applied that term to radio. So broadcasting was born in the early 1900s, around the 1920s or so. Now, he announced the results for the 1920 election over the air, too. Now, Westinghouse, I should say, helped to pioneer commercial radio. And when it sold some of its first radio receivers in 1921, they were advertised as being designed by Edwin H. Armstrong and Frank Conrad. He was born on May the 4th, 1874. He died December the 10th, 1941. He was 67 years old. He lived a short life comparatively to what we're used to now, where we expect people to live in their 90s. He was 67 when he died. Without him, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. So because of Frank Conrad being interested in radio technology back in the early 1900s, while World War I was still going on, because of him, I can talk to you right now in your car, in your living room, at work, over the internet, whatever. I can talk to you. Now, something that's interesting to note about that is the invention of radio and then broadcasting music over radio is actually extremely important to culture as we have it today. Think about it. Before radio, really the whole idea of a pop star was not really feasible, because not everyone could hear this guy's music. Now, yeah, the phonograph record certainly contributed to that, but you kind of have to buy the phonograph record to hear the phonograph record, right? I mean, you don't just hear it. Unless someone is at a record store playing that record over the speakers, you're not hearing this guy's music. And it's not like in the 1920s they had movies to watch that would have this guy's music licensed in it. Didn't work that way back then. And in fact, having licensed music in movies didn't really happen until the 60s or 70s, which is odd to think about too. Still, though, yeah, we wouldn't have pop culture the way we have it today, at least the musical side of it, because of radio promotion. Think about that. Michael Jackson might not be Michael Jackson without FM radio, without broadcasting music over the air. We wouldn't have that. So again, because of Frank Conrad's innovation and his odd idea of playing his phonograph records over the air, we have the pop stars that we have today. Better or worse, we do. Our pop culture is completely different than it might have been had he not done that simple thing, playing some phonograph records over the air. That's just bizarre to think about to me. I'm really into deviation. I like to think about time and how back in the day things were so much different, and what was it that led to where we are today. And it seems like that one event, him playing some phonograph records over the air, that's what began the whole explosion of music in your living room, music wherever you are. You can have a concert in your parlor. And that was actually partially how radio was marketed back in the day too, is you'd have a concert in your parlor. That sounds kind of quaint to us now, but back then, that was a crazy idea. It was weird to think of music being sent to you somehow without wires. They used to call radios back then wireless. Using technical terms for things wasn't quite popular back then. They call it the musicograph or the musicolium or something like that back then. You know how they were. So it was a simpler time. It really was. Things were much simpler, and this was one way to actually simplify things. It was very convenient to have this apparatus in your house that could listen to the airwaves and give you music. And it was as simple as turning a dial. All you had to do was buy the thing, plug it in, and turn the dial. There was no radio enthusiast skill needed, no performance parts necessary. There's no sort of skill necessary to run a radio. There's a lot of skill necessary to broadcast over radio. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do what we do here at Hot News Talk Radio over in Hickson. But no, back then, to listen to radio, and still today, to listen to radio doesn't really take any effort. And that's by design. That's absolutely by design, because radio should be free. We want you to listen to our radio station. You don't have to pay us to listen to our radio station. We're not asking you to pay us to listen to our radio station. Really, the only way you pay is by listening to the ads. And of course, you can always tune over. We hope you don't, but you listen to the ads and that's it. That's your form of payment. And that doesn't really require anything of you except your listening ear. But think about pop culture and how different it would have been had there not been any radio at all. Think about all the different radio hits. The Beatles probably wouldn't have been as big as they are now, or may not have even been a thing had there not been radio play. Now, it's different today, because radio hits are actually not as important, I would say, because of the age of the internet. Certainly, FM radio is extremely important to music still, but not nearly as much as it was back then, because it used to be that was pretty much the only way you get introduced to new music, except for talking to people at the record store. Well, nowadays we have the internet where you can see a song played on a music video online and it catches on that way. You've got viral marketing. You still have radio play to a huge degree, but I don't think that's going to be going away anytime soon. But we're still seeing a lot of marketing being directed towards the internet. And obviously, the internet was not even conceived of back in the early 1900s. The history of radio is kind of fascinating, but still, think about it. Today, we have the DMCA, we have all these different legislations and laws and regulations, and it all piles up. And he couldn't have done what he did with today's laws. Now, I know that seems like sort of a silly statement because today's laws were formed because of people like Frank Conrad doing what he did, but still, think about it. Under today's regulations, I couldn't do what Frank Conrad did. I couldn't set up an experimental radio station and then just start playing music over it, because if someone at the RIAA heard it, I'd be slapped with a fine. I couldn't just do that. Artists didn't see it back then the way they do now. Back then, a music artist would see radio play as, hey, free publicity. Now people know what my music sounds like and they're more likely to buy it on record. They thought in those terms back then, but that's really not how a lot of music artists, especially the popular ones, think about it today. Now it's all about, how do I make a buck? Now it's all about, well, I'm not getting paid royalties for this free publicity. It's not seen as free publicity as much as it is unlicensed play. You're not licensed to play my music, thus you shall never. It takes away from the idea of music being for everyone to listen to. Yeah, you should make some money off of the music you make, and I'm not taking away from that. And obviously, I'm as much of a capitalist as anyone. You should make money off of the music that you play. That's just how it should be. But think about it. Isn't it true that you're making this music for people to hear? Well, yeah. And I think a lot of indie artists are catching on to that idea, and probably have long before I was born anyway, that music should be heard and free publicity is free publicity. There's no such thing as bad publicity. Still, though, I think a lot of things have changed, in possibly for the negative in some ways, but also for the much better, thanks to people like Frank Conrad. Indeed, thanks to Frank Conrad, we now have what we have today. He was one pioneer and a series of pioneers that led to today's technology. Cell phones probably wouldn't happen without Frank Conrad. The idea of wireless communication the way we have it today probably wouldn't have happened without Frank Conrad and a team of other people just like Frank Conrad to innovate and to build on this idea of radio. So again, thanks to Frank Conrad. Without him, I wouldn't be talking to you right now over the air. And that's kind of a weird concept, because almost 100 years later, 2015, I'm talking over some of the same technology that was used back in the early 1900s. That's bizarre to think about. It's basically precisely the same idea that we're using now, just with a little bit more advanced methods to talk to you right now. In fact, his radio station was on AM. So I'm talking to you on the same modulation that he was talking over. And that's a bizarre thought to me. I'm sort of standing among giants, I guess, in the world of radio. And really, it's a great opportunity. It's something that I couldn't not do. I have to do radio. If I don't do radio, I don't know what to do. I couldn't do any other sort of work, really. At this point, it's too late for me. Even if I won the lottery, I would do exactly what I'm doing now, because I feel like I've been injected with some sort of viral disease that makes me dependent on talking over the airwaves. I have to do it now. It's all I know to do now professionally. So even more so economically, I kind of have to talk over the air, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I'll always be on radio, probably until my vocal cords give out or I die of some horrible debilitating disease. I'll still be talking to you over the radio. So we're in it for the long haul, guys. And I'm still young, so I've still got it for at least a little while longer. So I enjoy the opportunity to talk to you, the listener, and I greatly appreciate you giving me some of your time. This is AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. We're everywhere. You can listen to us on the old antiquated method on 1240 AM. And you can listen to us on our website, hotnewstalkradio.com. And you can check us out as well on the TuneIn Radio app for your smartphone, which is not yet quite replaced traditional radio. I don't think it ever will. Radio's not going anywhere. You can listen to us on the TuneIn Radio app for your smartphone. Just search for Hot News Talk Radio on TuneIn, and you can listen to us anywhere in the world over the net with your wireless communication device, also known as a cellular phone. And you can listen to us anywhere in the world that way. Also, check us out on the Hot News Cam. Go to YouTube and then search for Hot News Talk Radio, and you can see us on the Hot News Cam, spying in on the studio live anytime we're on the air in person here at Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240. We are the Hickson radio station here at Hot News Talk Radio. But, you know, if you're wanting to take a little bit of a trip out of Hickson to Soddy Daisy to get some authentic Mexican food, it's not a bad idea, actually. Delia's is carrying authentic Mexican food. They got a rich selection. Check out their food because I'm getting kind of hungry and I'm thinking about heading over there too. 521-7145 is their phone number, and it's on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light in Soddy Daisy. Delia's authentic Mexican food, and they have free iced tea there as well if you mention Hot News Talk Radio. So be sure to give them a shout out over there. Tell them that Hot News Talk Radio sent you. This is AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. Tesla says that a Reno journalist drove into security guards on the Gigafactory grounds. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a bit of a journalist, and if I were to run into somebody, it would hopefully be by mistake. In the effort of giving you information, I probably wouldn't be running into somebody. Just saying. Hey, caller, you're on the air. What's up?
I love your little radio dissertation there.
Thank you.
Laura Ingraham was saying yesterday on the air, she was going on the air to talk about politics and then changed her mind and decided to talk about pornography. And she says, only on radio can I do that. You can't do that in television because you've got producers and directors. And I did TV years ago and hated it. Tried it, and I had this thing sticking in my ear telling me how to put my feet and where to look and blah, blah, blah. I hate this.
Yeah.
And radio is just you, the microphone, and the person listening to you. It's very personal, and you could change up instantly. But you missed one guy's name. His name is Rick Sklar. And he's the guy that really codified Top 40 radio.
Really?
You want a little history of this? Because I think it's pretty interesting.
Hit me.
Now, you have to remember, AM was the medium of broadcast and main listenership up until about the mid-'70s, and that's when it crossed. So most music was on AM, big 50,000-watt AM stations and smaller 1,000 and 5,000-watt regional local stations. But WABC New York was a big 50,000-watt radio station that at night reached about 38 states in Canada. And in the early 60s, all these New York stations, and a lot of local stations are playing what? Playing sports over the radio. So, you know, you'd hear the Yankees and you'd hear the Mets and so on and so forth. But during double headers, they had about 15 minutes to fill. So they come up with an idea that why don't we just play the hit records between games? We don't have a lot of time here. We can probably fit 10 songs in. And that's the start of Top 40 radio. It was started in New York where they just played the top songs because we only have about 15 minutes to get these records in, so we'll play the hits. And then appears Rick Sklar in the 60s, who I believe is the godfather of Top 40 radio, who put the jingles in effect, whose idea was not really to play the top 40 songs, but the top 29 songs and play them over and over and over again in rotation. And WABC got to the point where when they played a new record, it sold 600,000 instantly. Can you imagine that?
That's insane. And again, that's an example of radio pushing the music industry. Records that people might not have even heard of, now they have heard them. They haven't just heard of them, they've heard that record now over the radio.
Yeah, the first play, it sold 600,000.
Gosh, that's such a push.
You talked about the RIAA and NASCAR, BMI, CSAC, who are leeches, and I think the Supreme Court said it's the closest thing they've ever seen to organized crime. But for playing records, radio station has to pay these leeches. Where I think it should be the opposite. I think they should have to pay radio for playing music. And I don't think people realize this, that when you're listening to a radio station, they are paying these organized crime entities money for playing their music. And the only way a radio station makes money is by selling commercials. That's it. Federal government, Hillary Clinton, Bush, and Obama and the rest of them were not cutting checks to radio stations.
Nope. No.
But without radio, you're right. Pop culture would definitely be different. But let us not forget Rick Sklar, who was the godfather of Top 40, who put in the jingle, WABC, and they would stuff. As a matter of fact, let me tell you this, Russell. There were people songwriters that wrote songs specifically for the jocks to talk them up, the intros. They were keeping that in mind, that the intro has to be about 6 to 10 seconds long, because in their head, they knew the disc jockey was going to talk up the song.
Wow, that's so interesting, because radio shaped music, and then music shaped radio, and it's sort of it's a symbiotic relationship, and it still is. It's such an interesting
thing.
And
another thing that's interesting is you'll notice even from the 40s to today, your average song's about 4 to 4.5 minutes. It used to be 2.5 minutes earlier, because you have an intro, a bridge, and a good beat, and you could dance to it.
That's all you need, really. Hey, thanks for your call. This is AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio and hotnewstalkradio.com.
Talk 1240.
Sky Aerial Services uses advanced drone technology to give you a better perspective and depth of your property and project. We offer aerial photography and video for your business, farm, home, or advertising campaigns, as well as editing services to complete the experience. Call us at 423-521-0284 and see how we can help you tell your story about your business, property, or project. We work with real estate professionals, both commercial and residential, developers, engineer inspectors, surveyors, ad agencies, auto and boat dealers, mapping services, insurance inspectors, corporate marketing, charity events, weddings, and photographers. Our consultation is free. Call 423-521-0284. That's 423-521-0284, or visit our website, skyaerialservices.com. Sky Aerial Services. The sky is our limit.
Here you are, working to keep your customers happy and to manage your cash flow. IRS problems are the last thing you need, but here they are, flapping about you like vultures. Get help from Eric Pelton and his team of accountants at E.J. Pelton Company. Audits, letters, proposed return changes, 1099s, penalty threats. Pelton Tax Resolution Services brings peace of mind and helps you keep more of what you've earned. EJPelton.com. Offices on Brainerd Road and in Soddy Daisy, just north of the Bilo. That's E.J. Pelton. Call 622-3156. Think ahead, 622-3156.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Soddy Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection: loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Soddy Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Soddy, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
It's Rick Davis Golden Diamonds half-off remounting party going on right now. Rick Davis Golden Diamonds half-off remounting party is an affordable way to revitalize your jewelry. Don't miss the party going on today at Rick Davis half-off remounting party. Give your diamond ring a fresh new look or a new design, as Rick's Golden Diamonds will fix it quickly, or maybe even while you wait. Rick Davis Golden Diamonds, 40 years of service, 5301 Brainerd Road, 5301 Brainerd Road. Call 580-2587, 580-2587 for Rick Davis Golden Diamonds, an affordable way to revitalize your jewelry. The half-off party's going on today, so don't miss it at Rick Davis Golden Diamonds. Rick Davis Golden Diamonds, 5301 Brainerd Road. Call 580-2587. Rick Davis Golden Diamonds.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Hi, I'm David Tulis, inviting you to make the move with me 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. The David Tulis Show, featuring Nooganomics.com for Chattanooga and beyond. 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays.
Hot News Talk 1240.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Wu. The Justice Department taking aim at violent, homegrown extremism.
The Domestic Terrorism Council will serve as the main point of contact for U.S. attorney offices nationwide. The person selected for the job will work to identify trends that can be used to help shape a national strategy for preventing domestic terror attacks.
Fox Radio's Rachel Sutherland. Hillary Clinton getting a helping hand from her chief rival, Bernie Sanders, last night in the CNN debate on Westwood One News.
The American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
Former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley is getting some positive reviews for his performance, but Jim Webb and Lincoln Chafee were largely irrelevant.
Fox Radio's John Decker. And 26 more elephants found dead of cyanide in Zimbabwe, in addition to 14 last week. One official there blaming the poaching on the U.S. ban on sport hunting, which she says is crucial to conservation efforts.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Tesla's been making some waves and apparently making some dents too. At least that's if some reports from ours are to be believed. We should believe those reports. Last Friday morning, a photographer for the Reno Gazette-Journal, as well as another RGJ, that's a tough, why would you name it that? RGJ allegedly trespassed on Tesla Motors Gigafactory grounds. As the two tried to flee, Tesla says that the photographer who struck two security guards in a Jeep owned by RGJ. According to the Story County Sheriff's Office, a photographer, Jose Andrews Barron, age 59, was arrested by deputies and then taken to the local detention center, where he was held for felony battery and trespassing with a $30,000 bail. In a blog post today, Tesla wrote that the two journalists were spotted taking photos of the Gigafactory, which is currently under construction. The responding security guard called for backup and alerted the sheriff's department, and then approached the two people. According to Tesla, the guard asked for their names and notified them that they were trespassing on Tesla property. They refused to provide their names, despite the Reno Gazette-Journal ID credentials hanging from their pockets. They also denied that they were trespassing, even though they had climbed through a fence designated with a private property sign, according to the allegations. Then Tesla alleges that all three people went back to the journalist's Jeep, where they were met by another security guard and asked to wait until the sheriff's department arrived. Then the journalist, reporting on its own journalist arrest, wrote this weekend that Barron tried to drive away and either hit or almost hit one or more of the security officers. Tesla alleged that the security guard tried to record the license plate off the rear bumper of the car, but Barron put the car in reverse and accelerated, knocking the security guard over. Tesla says that the two journalists continued their flight and they struck an ATV with at least one security guard in it. The guard then apparently tried to approach the Jeep, but according to the electric car company, the driver of the Jeep accelerated into him, striking him at the waist. A detail in RGJ's account that didn't make it into Tesla's is the newspaper vehicle was damaged in the altercation. A rock had been used to shatter the driver's side window, and the driver's side seatbelt had been cut in half. The Story County Sheriff told the paper that he could not confirm how the damage had occurred, although we can speculate that the guards are responsible for that, although I can sort of understand that considering the situation which was at hand. RGJ did not return Ars Technica's request for comment, but wrote over the weekend that Barron had been employed with the paper as a photographer since 1998, Tesla wrote, saying, "We appreciate the interest in the Gigafactory, but the repeated acts of trespassing, including those working for the RGJ, is kind of illegal. It's dangerous and it needs to stop." A Tesla spokesperson would not comment to Ars Technica about other trespassing incidents. Tesla's $5 billion Gigafactory, which is going to be producing lithium batteries for Tesla's electric vehicles, will have a dramatic impact on the region once fully operational. Tesla already secured deals with two major companies to develop mines for the production of lithium. A portion of the factory could come online as early as the year 2016. Hey, did you hear, by the way, that NASA has proposed a new plan for getting us onto Mars by the 2030s? That's pretty cool, isn't it? Now think about this. How are we going to get there? Well, we're going to need a lot of contractors because obviously the technology isn't quite there. Honestly, I think we could do it. It's just that it would be extremely dangerous, just as any space flight is. But honestly, I do think that we could potentially get to Mars with the technology we have today. It's just that nobody would really want to do it because it's so dangerous, I think, anyway. I would Honestly, thinking about it, I would probably go on a trip to Mars if given the opportunity. I'm not 100% certain on that, but given the opportunity, probably I would. I would have to have, of course, extensive training. I would have to have lots and lots of training, actually, because I have no experience whatsoever with space flight or really any flight at all. Still, though, it's such an exciting thing because there's not really any opportunity to explore in our current world. Everything's been explored on Earth, it seems like. Yeah, you can go caving, but that's about it. Yeah, you can climb a mountain, but those are all very expensive things. So there's not really a huge opportunity for exploration that's readily apparent. Space travel seems to be the only way, and that's kind of really expensive. I have a yearning to go somewhere that's not been seen before. I want to go somewhere where no one has been before, I guess you could say. And space is one of those places where in some areas, no one's actually been there before. Mars, no human has ever set foot on Mars. I would love to be one of the first few people, if not the first, to set foot on Mars. How cool would that be? Unfortunately, that's kind of unlikely considering that I'm a radio host and I'm a radio guy and I have no usable skills on Mars other than making witty quips, I guess. Can act as moral support, really sarcastic moral support. I guess I could broadcast from Mars. That would be pretty cool. I could broadcast from the spacecraft, and that would also be really cool. But other than that, my skills are pretty limited. I'm not a medic. I have no idea how to give CPR. Actually, I do. You just hit somebody in the chest to the tune of the Bee Gees, or the beat of the Bee Gees Staying Alive. That's how you do it. That's what, that's what a radio ad here on Hot News Talk Radio taught me on WSDT. So there you go. But no, I have no usable skills in space. So it's highly unlikely that I would be sent up into orbit, much less over to Mars. Oh, well, at least I have a realistic notion of my value. So there is that, I guess. I need an evaluation. But anyway, NASA has this new plan to send people to Mars by the year 2030, or at least by the 2030s. And it's pretty exciting, actually. Now, the idea of the whole NASA trip is hopefully realistic, I hope, because, again, it's not really been planned out other than in a PDF, which is called NASA's Journey to Mars, and it has a subtitle, which I can never remember the name of. But it's a 3-part plan that's going to hopefully reach the red planet by the 2030s. And we're trying to get, I'm trying to pull up a story on that right now because my phone crashed and I lost my notes. Don't you hate it when that happens, by the way? All this new technology we have, and I have my notes in Google Docs. So I just scroll through and it's a lot easier for me. Actually, when I was talking about Frank Conrad, I wrote my notes on paper, which you can see here. I'm holding it up for the camera on the Hot News Cam, only at Hot News Talk Radio. Just go to YouTube and then search for Hot News Talk Radio. I actually hand wrote my notes with a pen, which I have really bad handwriting. Here, I'll hold it up closer to the camera so you can see. My handwriting is noticeably terrible. So yeah, it's hard for me to read that. So I usually just type it out and put it in Google Docs, and sometimes bad things happen, whatever. So NASA wants to put people on Mars by the 2030s. Last week, they detailed how that might actually happen. In a report titled NASA's Journey to Mars, Pioneering Next Steps in Space Exploration, the agency laid out a 3-part plan on how it might reach the red planet. We are on a journey to Mars, read the report. In the next few decades, NASA will take steps towards establishing a sustainable human presence beyond Earth. Not just to visit, but to stay. The first phase involves more research on the International Space Station. I mean, research on the International Space Station is in research taking place on it, not research on the space station, because what's there to know about it other than what we already know? So especially when it comes to studying the effects of actually living in space for extended periods of time, and further development of its most powerful rocket yet, even more powerful than the Saturn V, called the Space Launch System, or SLS. Next, NASA wants to perform a variety of tasks in what they're calling cislunar space, a fancy name for the area around the moon. Hooray. That includes the Asteroid Redirect mission, which involves sending a solar electric robotic probe to an asteroid, removing a boulder-sized chunk, and then taking that back to lunar orbit. NASA is hoping to bring astronauts out to study the asteroid sample by around 2025. Now, that's a long way from now, or is it? I don't know, 10 years? Is that really that long from now? Considering sort of by the end of the decade, we will be on Mars. Not quite, but by the end of the decade, we could potentially be at least somewhat in space farther out than we have been before. And that's something that I'm kind of looking forward to, actually. In my lifetime, I could see somebody landing on Mars. That would be the moon landing for my generation. Well, my older generation. I'll be a lot older by 2035. I was born in 1995, so I will be in my 40s, I guess. I'll be about 40, actually, in 2035. So, oh, well, I guess I can live with that. Can I live with being 40? I don't know. I might die before then. We'll have to see. Probably some sort of illness that arises due to my terrible habits will kill me before I'm 40, but at least now I have something to look forward to, the landing on Mars, so that's pretty cool. Well, the final part of the plan involves sending astronauts to orbit the red planet and then possibly, maybe, landing on one of Mars's moons. Then comes the hardest part, landing human beings on Mars, the red planet itself, with equipment to get back off of the planet's surface and return safely back to Earth. Now, of course, we've all probably seen The Martian by now. Great movie. I loved it. That's the Matt Damon film. Now, no, it's not the perfect film, especially in the scientific area, but it was pretty good, actually. Not bad, anyway. Certainly not terrible. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I thought some of the dialogue was silly, especially the whole, oh, I can fly around like Iron Man thing. That just seemed kind of forced to me, but hey, it's a faithful adaptation of the movie, or of the book, I should say. It's a great novelization of the film. No, it was a good movie. I liked it a lot. And it sort of got me interested in Mars, which I'm sure was intentional. You know, there's no way that Ridley Scott made that movie never intending for anyone to be interested in Mars. You know, I mean, come on, there's no way. So I'm really excited about the potential future of human exploration in space. Now, we don't have like a deep space probe, or well, we do have probes, but we don't have a deep space station of any sort. The International Space Station is actually not that far out. Consider this. If you were to, and yes, I watched that Vsauce video, if you were to build a tower straight up to where the International Space Station is, say you had an oxygen tank and you walked out of the tower onto the roof or something, you would actually be able to walk around because there's gravity there, about 90% of what we have on Earth right now. You would feel a little bit lightheaded maybe, but you could survive up there for extended periods of time. The reason they're weightless in space is not because there's no gravity. There's not zero gravity, there's zero G, which is a little bit different, hard to explain. It's a mathematical, physics thing, which I'm not really into, but basically the concept is they're falling at such a fast rate that they're actually falling fast enough to miss the Earth constantly. It's called an orbit. And that being the case, they're still under the influence of Earth gravity. In fact, they're under the influence of about, again, 90% of Earth gravity. It's just that they're moving so fast that they're falling around the Earth constantly, continuously. That's why you have to get what's called escape velocity. It's really weird to think about, but that is how it works. You can get out of the atmosphere more or less with just a weather balloon. I mean, we've seen all those videos with the GoPros strapped onto weather balloons and they get out of the atmosphere. Well, that's cool, but you have to go a little bit faster than that if you want to escape the influence of Earth gravity. You have to go, a few thousand miles per hour faster than that if you want to escape the influence of Earth gravity. That being the case, the International Space Station is actually traveling really, really fast. I'm not clear on how fast. I've read before, but I forget now. But suffice it to say, the International Space Station is traveling at an extremely high rate of speed. Same effect as when a roller coaster is going down and you feel weightless. That's actually the exact same effect that they're under in the International Space Station. It's just 100% of the time. Like they have those zero-G airplane flights where they fly up really high and then they sort of nosedive really quickly. That's the same exact effect that the people on the International Space Station are under. It's just 100% of the time. So it's simulated zero gravity. Sort of, anyway. That's my basic understanding of it. It's a really interesting concept because, again, they're under the same influence as we are, 90% of it. It's weird to think about because if, again, somehow we managed to build a carbon microtube or nanotube building that went straight up, we could walk around on the top of it, assuming that we had, pressure suit and everything. It would be entirely possible. You would fall if you jumped off the International Space Station down to Earth. And that's kind of weird to think about, more or less. Again, if you jumped off of it and then traveled straight down, you would fall because if you jumped off of it and did if you did like a what do they call it, EVA, then you would actually be falling at the same rate as the International Space Station. So you would have to fall backward and then fall to Earth. It's a weird concept anyway. It's hard to wrap your head around, but that's how it works. It's really, really bizarre. Now, I love 3D printers, and the whole idea of 3D printing sort of plays into the space idea too, because we could 3D print on the International Space Station. And in fact, as far as I've read, that actually has been done. So you could 3D print on Mars quite easily. In fact, that might be a better way of doing things when it comes to fashioning tools. We might not carry a whole lot of tools down to the surface other than a few basic ones like a shovel or what have you, and maybe not a whole lot more. Once we hit the surface, though, we need a 3D printer and carry one of those with us, and you can 3D print whatever tools you might need. NASA can assess your situation and then use that assessment to send you a CAD file of what you need to print out, and then you can affix that to whatever tool you need, and there you go. You 3D printed a tool. That's pretty cool when you think about it, because again, you can actually 3D print any implement you could ever want or need on Mars. In fact, we know that you can 3D print an adjustable wrench. That actually does work. So the possibilities are essentially endless. You can have very complex machines. As long as they're durable enough, they'll work just as well as anything that would be manufactured in a CNC machine. That's weird to think about, but it's possible. Anything's possible now with 3D printing. Well, unfortunately, in the consumer market, we haven't really seen a whole lot of 3D printing. By that, I mean, there's not a whole lot of 3D printed products for us to use right now. That's going to change, but that's the case for right now. Something that's kind of interesting to note, though, is there's also kind of a stagnation when it comes to 3D printers for us to use. Now, yeah, there are a lot, but it seems like, I don't know, just something feels stale about all of them now. Mostly because of cost, I suppose. It's prohibitively expensive. Maybe it's just me being poor and guilty about being poor and wishing I had better things. I guess that's envy working in, but I just get annoyed when I look at consumer 3D printers because it's not what I want. They're so, well, they're not quite what I want because they're expensive and the stuff they print is not quite as durable as I would want, I guess. I don't know. There's a complex thing to it. Oh, by the way, I just found out from a friend on Twitter, the International Space Station is moving at 8 kilometers per second, which is really, really fast, by the way. That's kind of insane that there's this object in space moving at 8 kilometers per second, falling at 8 kilometers per second, actually. But anyway, back to 3D printers. Thank you, my friend on Twitter. By the way, you can follow me on Twitter. Just search for my name, Russell Stroud. Actually, I changed my name for Halloween. It's Russell Spook for now, but you can find me if you search for my handle, which is Mecha Keller. Actually, just go to Hot News Talk Radio, and I'm following Hot News Talk Radio. So you can look that way, I suppose. But anyway, Pirate 3D Incorporated raised about $1.5 million on Kickstarter back in 2013 when 3D printers were still sort of a cool new idea, promising a 3D printer which anyone could use. Pretty cool, right? A total of 3,520 backers pledged money to the project, including 3,389 who pledged money over $300 to eventually get a printer. As of now, 60% of the orders have not been fulfilled, and it seems kind of unlikely that in the end, backers are actually going to be getting a refund or their product. In a convoluted note to backers, the company's founder states that the company is exploring raising additional capital, yet seems to say that it does not expect to be able to fulfill the remaining Kickstarter orders even with additional cash. Investing is a risky business, as TechCrunch points out. Investing is a very risky business, but Kickstarter seems to make it, I guess, risk-free, but that tends to not be the case all the time. Yeah, remember, when you're investing in something on Kickstarter, I would invest with the expectation that I'm not going to get my money back. And if I do, it's a pleasant surprise. That's how I usually treat it. Maybe because I'm cynical, but whatever. Crowdfunding removes barriers and makes it easier to get products into production, and that's certainly great. But raising money needed to get a product from an idea to, raising money to get a product from an idea is kind of hard and takes a lot of time. Sometimes it's more expensive than you might estimate. But often over the course of fundraising and moving things into production, issues arise and they're expensive. The Pirate 3D Buccaneer raised a blockbuster $1.438 million on June the 29th, 2013, which was a record amount for Kickstarter at the time. The first printers were supposed to be shipping to backers on February 2014. That didn't happen. As of September of last year, only 200 products had shipped. And about a year later, despite selling the product through retail channels, 60% of backers are still awaiting the products which they were promised. Sometimes Kickstarter and Indiegogo projects actually fail. There is risk associated with crowdfunding, lots of risk actually, because again, you're putting your money on the line. It might seem like a sure thing when you're investing on Kickstarter, but trust me, it's not. You're not always going to get what you want. That's the simple, hard fact of life. It may seem like you've been cheated, but maybe the Kickstarter founders underestimated the understanding that the public may have with Kickstarter. Or maybe I'm just giving Kickstarter a bit too much credit. But when I think of Kickstarter, I think of, again, in the terms that I might not get my money back. In fact, I probably won't. That's how I think when I think of Kickstarter. I'm essentially investing my money in faith in a product. And if a product gets made, awesome. If not, well, that's the risk I take. It's venture capital. That's all it is. It's just a platform for venture capital. And if you're willing to take a risk, great. If not, well, don't pay. That's the simple fact of it. And there's probably a disclaimer somewhere in the Kickstarter terms of use that explain that, but maybe nobody reads the terms of service anyway, so that kind of makes sense. Yeah, it's not surprising actually. Pirate 3D must fulfill its orders or issue a refund according to Kickstarter's terms that the company agreed to. It's all pretty much cut and dried. If neither conditions are met, backers have the right to sue the creator, according to a conversation that the writer of the article had with a representative from Kickstarter. The Pirate 3D founders did not respond to any requests for comments, so oh well. The black and white policy is what caused Kickstarter to craft a new set of terms that gives product creators a backdoor out of their obligations. Simply put, sometimes things don't work out, and it seems like that's the case with Pirate 3D Buccaneer Printer. So as cool of an idea as it was, it doesn't look like it really worked out. It's unfortunate, but it happens. Sometimes you need more than just Kickstarter to make a project happen. As much as we want to be the sole creators of a project, sometimes that just can't happen. As much as we want to, we the community, we want to make something happen, sometimes it just doesn't. As great as an idea as something might seem, is it really commercially viable? Is everyone going to be buying this 3D printer? There's not really a good reason for, say, your average Joe to buy a 3D printer other than to print out stuff he thinks is cool. That's kind of it. It is cool and it's neat and I want one, but there's not really a whole lot of reason for the average Joe to want one. I'm an enthusiast, so my interest can't really be gauged compared to the interests of the commercial market because, again, I'm a different sort of guy. I'm not your average Joe, I guess. That's not putting myself on a pedestal. That's actually bringing me down, saying I'm really weird. Sometimes I wish I was the average Joe, but, again, sometimes things don't work out either. Well, this is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com. There is a debate coming up today, a big smackdown. I don't know who's going to be snacking down who, but we'll find out. We're going to be debating the Mark Kaler indictment and probably going to get into police brutality in general, knowing the people I'm going to be debating with. But this is Digital Drive anyway, and we're talking about technology and quite a bit more. But coming up at 2 is the big debate, which I think is going to be much better than the Democratic debate, because who cares about them anyway? They don't have any bearing on politics other than just to be figureheads for a movement. And that's about it. That's all the president is. He's a figurehead for a movement. He's a figurehead for a party. He's a figurehead for the liberals, for the conservatives, for the Tea Partiers, whoever they are. That's it. He's a figurehead. He's like the thing you put on the front of your ship. He's symbolic, nothing more. That's all you need, but that's all he is, too. I think we've overstated the position of the president, perhaps to our non-benefit, but oh well. That's all that happens. This new debate is going to be much more interesting and possibly much more important than the presidential debates, because we're talking about a real issue, which is something the presidential debaters never actually did. They talked about climate change and they talked about like emails, but that's not really a real issue. We're going to be talking about the real hard-hitting issues, police brutality. And that debate's coming up at 2 right here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com. Clutch and Keon Rose up next.
This is the modern world.